Splatoon 2, released in 2017, was an important launch title for the Nintendo Switch and featured various improvements over the original game. Among these was the introduction of two new weapon classes, Dualies and Brellas, both owing inspiration to weapons from other games, essentially being Splatoon's implementation of dual pistols and a shotgun. The introduction of these weapons would redefine the meta and offer unique balancing challenges, particularly in the case of Brellas. So what makes Splatoon's shotguns so unique? Why does their balancing uniquely matter, and how does this affect the game at large? The Umbrella class is based around the good old shotgun, but the developers knew that they could do more than just add another gun to the game. There are two defining features of the weapon, the shot itself and the Umbrella's shield. The shotgun shot requires an individual press of the fire button, with the exception of the undercover umbrella, and suffers from a decently long delay between each release of ink. Looking at the standard umbrella, literally the Splatbrella, its shot does 81 damage and has slightly less range than the splatter shot, though it suffers from significant spray. By almost every metric, the shot itself is less effective than one from the splatter shot, unlike most other shotgun style weapons in other games, or most other shooters. However, the main draw is the umbrella shield. After firing, the umbrella pops out like a shield, able to absorb damage. While the umbrella is out, the player's mobility is significantly limited. Turning is sluggish and moving around is closer to sidestepping than the traditional walking exhibited in normal gameplay. The shield only protects from one side, leaving the left, right, back, and top exposed to receiving damage. It also consumes ink to keep the shield open, which limits the umbrella's ability to survive a long fight. Even more importantly is the most unique aspect of the Brella class, the pop-out. After leaving the shield open for some time, it will pop off and move a long distance in the direction it is facing. This forces the Brella user to come out of their shield for at least a little bit every couple of seconds, but also gives them a powerful tool to push into a contested area and aid their team, particularly in the case of Pentabrella. We'll make some comparisons with another game and learn about some tricky competitive design, which brings us to a conniving Frenchman. Team Fortress 2 is a legendary game, revered for its infinitely replayable gameplay and brilliant and innovative design. It features a cast of 9 unique playable characters who happen to be some of the most well-crafted protagonists in video game history. Each class plays distinctly from one another, and one stands out for the purposes of this video: the Spy. The Spy plays very differently from the other classes. All of the other classes care about fighting. After all, Team Fortress 2 is a competitive shooter. But the Spy is the only character to somewhat exist outside of this dynamic. The Spy exists behind the enemy lines, contributing little directly to the firefight. This brings about many challenges when designing the Spy. The basic premise of the Spy is very common in video games, particularly single-player video games. It's incredibly fun to sneak around an enemy using goofy gadgets to eliminate your opposition from within and make it to the big boss at the end of the fortress, without any team for backup. The Hitman series obviously comes to mind here, and many games include stealth elements. However, this never translates to multiplayer. Just imagine for a second you're playing a normal shooter, except there's a guy who can go completely invisible, totally undetectable to you, perfectly disguise himself as one of your own, and kill you with literally one shot. This would be incredibly unfair. What are you even supposed to do in that situation? That's fun in single player, but in multiplayer that's horrible game design. It removes agency from the player and makes deaths feel totally unfair. In my opinion, one of the main principles of a good competitive game is responsibility. You should remain responsible for the outcome of a game. When you win in Smash, it should be because you legitimately outskill your opponent, not because of blind luck, looking specifically at Brawl's tripping mechanics here. Not to say there aren't good implementations of luck, Luigi's Side B is a great example of that actually, but when the player dies for a reason out of their control, it feels unfair. That is a very negative feeling that you simply don't want to give your player, and quickly leads to salt, rage, and other undesirable feelings and thus behaviors. Because this imagined character is basically unstoppable, they would literally be game ruining. Without any sort of counterplay, they would undoubtedly be the best character in the game, and other players would be losing for reasons largely out of their control. But Team Fortress 2, the endlessly revered game, features this exact character description, but it doesn't ruin the game. In fact, it's one of its most praised aspects. How? Well, it begins by recognizing that the spy is the most dangerous character to be strong. If Scout, Heavy, or Demo Man are balanced in a way that makes them very powerful, that certainly isn't ideal, but there are still ways to deal with these characters and ultimately overcome. If you choose to take on a fight with a strong Demo Man, it's still your choice to pick that fight at that location. You have factors you can control. An overpowered spy, however, lacks more of this player agency, so it's important to not only keep the spy in check, but to do it in ways that create interesting gameplay scenarios where the spy and its opponent can express their skill. The first method which this is done is by restricting the spy's invisibility. The cloak can be beaten in one of two ways. Firstly, it'll run out after a long enough time and takes a long time to charge. Secondly, touching a player or being hit by anything will reveal them for a split second. This means not only can the spy not cross through an active firefight, but it creates the counterplay of spy checking. By periodically turning around and firing in places a spy would likely be, you can potentially spot a spy before they can backstab. This is vital to the spy's gameplay. It keeps the spy effective because its mere presence creates a distraction which will harm the enemy team, while also creating room for skill expression as the enemy players become better at spy checking and the spy becomes more careful with their movement. Secondly, there's the limits on disguises. The spy loses his disguise after backstabs or any sort of attack, giving the enemy team a free chance to kill it. The spy will still take damage while disguised, including damage that causes particle effects like bleeding. And finally, the spy is unable to use the disguised character's weapons. And in the case of the scout, the spy does not get scout speed or double jump. This limits the spy's ability to play an effective disguise, requiring the spy to get creative with their movement and offering eagle-eyed opponents a chance to stop the threat before anything happens. These limits are designed in a way that doesn't just directly nerf the spy, but creates gameplay around the spy. This is what makes him so iconic and so revered across the gaming world. Still, the spy is considered the weakest class in TF2, but this is intentional. Because the spy has so much potential to cause harm and can uniquely ruin the game unlike any other class, it's better to overcorrect than to undercorrect. This brings us back to Splatoon. I talked about the spy because, quite frankly, the Brellas are in a very similar position in terms of balance and design. The main issue with Brellas comes from the shield. Many multiplayer games have limited shields or shield-like abilities because they present huge gameplay issues. In fact, Splatoon has had 2 shields which became a nightmare to design around, and I want to look at that real quick. Looking at Bubbler from Splatoon 1, it was essentially an instant get-out-of-jail-free card. It made for poor design because by just having the special, the holder was able to avoid punishment for almost any mistake, and their opponents who had done nothing really wrong found themselves quickly in a horrible position. While there was some counterplay about being smart around a player who has a bubbler available, it still allowed for moments that felt very unfair, and deaths that didn't really feel like they were your fault. Responsibility. Furthermore, because the bubble could be shared across teammates, it can make for a near unstoppable push that has very little counter ability. Splatoon 2's reworked version of Bubbler, Ink Armor, was arguably worse from a design perspective. Ink Armor would protect the player for 30 points worth of damage and would negate damage up to 100 points on the hit that broke the armor. Also, on the final hit, players can only take up to 80 points of damage. While Ink Armor now took 2 seconds to apply, it is applied to the entire team now, which creates even more opportunities for unfair feeling gameplay. A charger can be sniping as per usual, till suddenly everyone on the enemy team can just tank a charger shot, leaving the charger with significantly weakened defense and reduced ability to project power, even though they didn't really do anything. In this context, we can look at Brellas. Brellas do a very similar thing to Ink Armor. They have health and will protect the player from its breaking shot. I personally find Brellas very useful for countering a surprise reef slider, giving me survivability no other weapon has in that situation. This makes them uniquely dangerous in that they can easily lead to unfun gameplay, which is why the Brellas are so brilliant. The Umbrella's ability to pop out is one of the primary factors which makes it so unique and works so well. The Brella user is forced to put down the shield and attack, at least for a moment, lest they lose their shield. Imagine for a second if Undercover had the health of Splat Brella. That would be absurd. Any fight that it doesn't want to take, it can just back away from like it's nothing. It could hold down enemies for a significant amount of time while reinforcements came. It would be simply unfair to fight. There's significantly less gameplay that comes out of one character doing nothing but holding a shield out. Still, there is one other important factor in Brella's balance, and that's the turning speed. Most weapons in Splatoon turn perfectly to match the angle fed by the controller. At a moment's notice, any weapon can be facing at any angle in the hands of a skilled enough player. Brellas are the lone exception to the rule. While the shield is out, the Brellas have a significantly reduced ability to turn, keeping them very vulnerable to flanking. In the previous hypothetical, imagine now that this Brella can turn on a dime. With a skilled enough player, there is literally no play the enemy team can do other than outranging and shredding the canopy. That is simply uninteresting gameplay. Fights lose a tactical skill that makes competitive shooters so unique and interesting and becomes closer to a glorified game of chess. The slow turning speed creates gameplay with the Brella. The shield can be beaten by flanking it by cutting off its routes to escape, or once again, landing shots while the shield is down. These two limitations are vital in balancing Brellas in 1v1 fights. Not only does it literally balance them in terms of actual weapon strength, but it creates that interesting gameplay. There are tons of little decisions made with every fight with a Brella, all of which combined creates a legitimately interesting fight that doesn't feel predetermined. Similarly to Spy, by nerfing gimmicks in ways which create gameplay opportunities instead of taking them away, a better weapon, and therefore a better game, is the end result. Finally, let's talk about the shield pop. This is the main gimmick of Tent, and a core feature of most Brellas. The shield pop allows Brellas to move up, take space, and support their team in a very interesting way, similar to a curling bomb. By trading a shield for a movement opportunity, the dynamics shift. The Brella user itself is incredibly vulnerable, but a new object has appeared on the stage to contend with. While the shield pop is less useful on Splat Brella and Recycled, it's a primary feature of Tent. The large shield creates a fun weapon ideal for supporting teammates. The introduction of the shield pop, even if not the strongest feature of many Brellas, has the benefit of creating more room for interesting gameplay. Both players have agency, and both remain responsible for the loss in any given fight. While Brellas generally remain a weak class, they avoid the catastrophic effects a weapon with a shield might have on the game, and remain extremely fun to play with. By designing them in a smart way, Nintendo is able to introduce a new type of weapon that could be genuinely enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to catch you next time.